Hey, how do I displace my evils? Said nobody ever. Well, the answer that we have is put them outward and put them downward. Welcome to News from Heaven. And you might be saying, hey man, I know what you're doing. This is like a religiously, I would say spiritually, whatever kind of show, and you're going to tell me I'm evil. What else is new? Okay, we are going to talk about evils. But I'd say there's a really good reason to do it. And this show, habitually, we are talking about how do we make our life experience better? Why aren't we all happy all the time? Why is life unnecessarily complicated? I like to depict it, and if you've ever seen this program, you've seen this a million times, as these dark clouds of the mind. Why, when our needs are met, do we have this bombardment of fears or regrets or ruminations on the past, or these uncontrollable negative feelings, or these doubts about ourselves? All this stuff is crushing in, right? Which in my case, and I think in a lot of people's cases, I hear this, is making life so much less happy than it should be, and actually leading to some really dire circumstances. And the only thing that matters is trying to get each other out of this, trying to get ourselves out of that. And how do we there is light that dispels this. How do we get there? What's keeping this stuff in? Could be that these things that we're calling evils in the text are the root cause of some of the stickiness of this negative stuff. So anything that lets us rearrange those or gain some leverage or purpose on those is worth our time. If you want to follow along, you certainly can. Download Swedenborg's Divine Providence for free. This is number 283. He says, as already noted in number 281. Nope, we're not going back there, but you certainly are welcome to on your own time. The purpose of letting us think about our evils, even to the point of intending them, is so that they can be displaced, keyword, by civic, moral, and spiritual principles. So we're going to lay some groundwork here. Think about our evils. So we are asserting that there can be stuff in the human psyche that does not serve a good purpose there, that is actually against life and order. There is a very easy physical analog to this. You have a body. The body is trying its best to achieve homeostasis or something close to it, trying to do the things it's meant to be able to do, and you have elements in there that are against the functioning of the body. So these would be viruses, certain kinds of bacteria, protists, fungi. Do any protists live in your body? Anyway, all that stuff is working against health. So it is, there are certain impulses and certain ideas that work to harm. And I think it's up to each of us individually to look inside ourselves and to say, what do I feel like is something that I don't really believe when I'm in my right state of mind? I don't think people should do this to each other, this thing that I want to do. I don't think that's right. We can't really identify that in someone else, but in ourselves, we can go in and do it. And if you are into that kind of work, and if you're into surveying the internal contents and believing that stuff is a blockage between me and who I want to be, and me and the happiness of heaven, you might think, man, it would be easier if all this negative stuff just never occurred to me. If I just never had to grapple with these concepts coming in and everything. Why can't you just wipe that clean? Well, this is why. So we get the chance to consider, hey, what if I did this, or why don't I approach life in this way, even to the point of intending this negative stuff, or I would say feeling joy in it or feeling pleasure in it. Why we do that is so that it's all for the purpose, the same thing I was talking about here, clearing up this mess, so that they can be displaced by civic, moral, and spiritual principles. And this right away is we're going beyond general morality stuff. And here's the particular, what are we upgrading? What are we replacing that real estate in the mind with? It's civic, moral, and spiritual principles. This happens, how do you do that? This happens when we consider that something is in opposition to what is lawful and fair, what is sincere and decent, what is good and true, and therefore in what is peaceable, happy, and blessed in our lives. That is a great definition, because we can get tangled up in this idea of evil and people judging and saying, well, your life is different than mine, so therefore it's evil. But when we're looking inside of ourselves and saying, look, this tendency, whatever it is, my tendency to snap at something, is I think this is in opposition to what is lawful and fair. Like this shouldn't be done. Or what is sincere and decent. And we don't really talk about stuff like decency that much anymore, but I like that. It's this gentle quality of like, is that really a decent thing to do? Is that rude? Or is that kind? What is good and true? And therefore, turning it back around to us, what is peaceful, happy, and blessed in our lives. Because it's not this trade-off where, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to be happy and be looking out for yourself, or are you going to try to be nice to other people because it's what you should do? They're the same thing. You can get these temporary high from living the life of the ego and those impulses, but it's always this cycle that leads back to misery. That's what and I'm not telling you this because, well, this book is telling me that, and I should do what the book says because it's what this show is about. The reason I'm attracted to this material in the first place is because I spent a very long time trying to, and still do, thinking those things will make me happy. If I can win in this regard, if I can get what I'm craving in this regard, that's going to be great. That's going to be happiness. But it doesn't work. It's a trick. It's a trick. They are selling me this thing that doesn't actually work. Therefore, what is peaceful, happy, and blessed in our lives, that is what is cut off by these things that are evils. The Lord heals, and look at this, not that the Lord is like calling us out, but the Lord heals the love of our volition by these three sets of principles, bonk, 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 as means, using our fears at first, but our loves later. So as we adopt, and Swedenborg goes into more detail about these in other places, but civic essentially is what's the right thing to do for society? What is just orderly? I can't run through this red light, because if we all did that, you couldn't get, let alone the chance of killing people, but just if it just became the breaking down of the traffic system, then people wouldn't be able to get where they need to go on time. This is just not, civically, we just can't do that. You can't just stick your gum on something. Moral is more about, is this right and fair to this particular person? How does this affect them? Should it be done? More on a just social interaction kind of level. Spiritual principles being, this is something that is, for now we'll just say this is deeper, this is more core than that. So we instill these things in opposition to what would be that. Am I spending too much time on this? Well, there's no instant feedback on this, so I'll say no, I'm spending exactly the right amount of time on this. The civic example I gave, this killer, cutting-edge, relevant example of running through a red light, to say, look, that just doesn't fly in terms of my participation in society. The opposite principle we were operating on is just, I want what I want. I want to be where I want to be right now. The world revolves around me. So that is replaced by this joy and satisfaction and fairness. And at first, this happens using our fears, and later our loves. So this would be, initially, I'm worried because I don't want to get hit going through this red light. Or in a less sort of physiological self-interest based example, I don't want people to think I'm rude. Because if I did this thing that other people don't like, then my reputation would suffer, and I fear for my reputation because I really want everybody to think I'm great, because that's what our ego wants. So at first, it's out of fear. We follow these things out of fear, but later it's out of love. Because this is when we really we understand the impact of something and why we don't want to do it. And that is why we have to be allowed to think about these things and to do them and to see other people do them and really start to get this three-dimensional picture of the difference between what is fair and right and true versus what's not. And that's in a way, the point of life. Still, our evils are not taken away from us and discarded. They are only displaced, keyword, and relegated to the sides. Once they are there, goodness is in the center. The evils are out of sight, since whatever is in the center is right in front of our eyes, visible and perceptible. We got to draw something here. So if we're talking about field of consciousness, okay, I think this is going to be a circle. You guys all know that story where Leonardo da Vinci forgot his ID somewhere, and they said, how do we know it's really you? And he said, well, I'm going to draw a perfect circle, and he drew a perfect circle freehand, and that's how they knew it was him. Watch this. The perfect circle. Field of vision. If this is our consciousness, right? This is what we're focusing on. That there can be things in the peripheral of your consciousness, and this is what we're focusing on. To draw another perfect circle for the how it shouldn't be diagram, if we have our evils, this would be our sort of racing thoughts, judgmental thoughts of other people, attackative ways of thinking, obviously self-interested things you wouldn't want other people to know that you're thinking for good reasons. That stuff just becomes all-consuming. That is what we think about. That is what's in our mind day to day. That's a problem. But if we get to the point where we consciously push some of that stuff away, because this stuff wants to be there and it wants to be seen and it's reactive, it's trying to be the default. But if we get it to where it's there, but it's really on the periphery, like we know those are there, but when they come up, we are at least policing them a little bit. Say, no, that's not right. That's not a good way to think about it. And you never know for sure whether something is just a right impulse of yours and you're defending yourself or whatever. So I'm not going to get into, let's not split hairs on it. But in general, you can say, look, is this stuff good or not good? So you get that to the periphery, and then what's good is there in the center, right? And then we feel like that looks like such a healthy thing, right? That still looks a little weird. Right? It still looks like it's sort of infected. So why? Why isn't this good enough to just have the good in the middle? And what is this? Does this have anything to do with outward and downward? We need to realize, though, that even though goodness may be in the center, this still does not mean we are devoted to it. Okay, so we've got goodness, but then there's being devoted to goodness. Unless the evils that are off to the side are tending downward and outward. There we go. The evils need to tend downward and outward. This is a spiritual direction, so don't think physically like towards your cranium if we're thinking about the brain. We're talking about everything that is downward is away from that's just, both of those directions are referencing a center. If they're moving away from the center of what we care about, that's how we know we're devoted to good. If they're turned upward and inward, they have not been displaced because they're still trying to get back to the center. Okay, so somehow we have these things, which I thought were sort of inanimate things, but you can have a sense of these things, they're still red, they're still there, they're still kind of alive, and they're still trying to claw their way back in. Because we've said, all right, I don't want to, maybe I'm going to push this out of my mind right now, but we haven't really dealt with them. We haven't really dealt with them in a way that they're deactivated. But if we get to the point where they're trending or tending downward and outward, where they have kind of gone into hibernation mode, right? You think about viruses, as I mentioned before, there's a dormant state that they exist in. Am I telling the truth? I'm pretty sure this happens. You can get them in a way in which they're there. You can have them hanging out in your body, and there's a lot of viruses that we can't get rid of, or maybe it's something else that we can't get rid of, and they're there, but you can live, and they're not really an outbreak, but they can get triggered into an outbreak, and that's when there's a problem. So you can have these negative things, or even a lot of the times it'll be there's a certain kind of yeast in the body, which at low levels is fine, but if it gets into a flare up, then it causes a problem. So it is here that we kind of get these into the dormant state. And that to me is starting to feel a little bit like, okay, that's managed, it's taken care of. But how, beyond drawing a black arrow on them, how do you get them to be in that state? They are tending and turned downward and outward when we are abstaining from our evils as sins, and even more so when we find them distasteful. Then we are condemning them, not condemning ourselves, but condemning them and consigning them to hell, which turns them in that direction. Okay, now this is something we can start to work with, because every one of us has a miniature heaven and a miniature hell inside of us. This is our miniature heaven, the good things in us, and this is the miniature hell. the relegation of the harmful things to a place where they can't do as much harm. That's what heaven and hell is. So there's two ways we get this to happen: seeing evils as sins and when we find them distasteful. Because when we're talking about before, these things, the only reason these aren't occupying the center is because of some kind of fears. I don't want to be seen as this kind of person, or I don't want to get caught for this sort of stuff, or even a fear of, let's say, a fear of God. That God, I'm getting the message from my religious tradition of some kind that God doesn't want me to do this, so I don't want to get punished for it, so I'm not going to do it. Sure, that's fine, and it has a good impact on society and everything, but it's not the actual powerful way to push this stuff out, and I'll give you a little speech here about it. The actual way to push that stuff out, the actual way that we become free from them, is when we don't even love the thing anymore. And that's harder with some things, easier than with others. I can definitely think of things that felt like they were attractive to me when I was, let's say, a teenager. Well, I remember, like, the danger of, like, let's go trespass or something, because it's fun to. I have absolutely no desire to do that now. And now, like, being a property owner myself and knowing the sense of the sense of fearfulness that it instills in you if you know somebody's been messing with something, I absolutely detest that. There's no part of me that's like, oh, I want to do something risky that's going to somehow scare somebody else. The more that we see the impact those things have, to understand you can't get this when you're younger, but to start to get, this is how it makes the other people in that situation feel. And maybe it comes through somebody doing it to you. When we start to really just say, look, this thing sucks. This really is no good. That means we've actually rejected it from our heart. It doesn't mean you never have to struggle with it again, but it means that thing in the court of opinion came up and said, here's what I can offer you. This kind of thrill, this kind of joy, this kind of promise of happiness. And you said, it doesn't matter what you're offering, because what you are, I don't agree with on a fundamental level. That's awesome. And we get there in increments, but as we do, that really sorts out this whole mess of the mind we were talking about. Because those evils themselves, we're talking about the impact they have out in the world. They also have a major impact on us, because everything evil and false that's bothering us needs these things present in order to survive. So as we are pushing these things outward and downward, this is a picture of heaven in our mind. That is where there's invulnerability to all this stuff. Our discernment, and this is why it's important to get to this sorted picture here. Our discernment can accept what's good and what is evil, what is true and what is false, but our essential volition cannot. We can turn this stuff over and should turn over good and evil and the difference between them in our minds all the time. We're constantly sorting through and sifting through, and it's not a panic thing if everything we think today is negative. But what we love and what we really choose and want and act on and what drives us is got to eventually be one or the other. This must be focused on what is evil or what is good, and not on both, because our volition is our essential self. You just can't, you're not flexible enough. You can't bend in both of those directions. And Swedenborg talks about it like different, the loves inside of us for what's good and what's kind and what's right and what's fair are like gentle. He talks about them like gentle animals, like herbivores, like sheep or lambs. And he talks about the predatory inclinations in us being like predatory animals. You can't have those things in the same enclosure at the zoo. I know animals, do they or don't they like being at the zoo in the first place? I'm saying you can't put those two things together without a problem, right? So it's got to be eventually one or the other. Or you can say you get your negative cravings to the point where they're tame enough that the lion and the lamb can really lay down together. It is where our life's love is. In our discernment, what is good and what is evil are kept apart like an inside and an outside, so we can be inwardly focused on evil and outwardly on good. If we're saying, look, I'm going to put on a good face, but it's not really what I care about. However, when we're being reformed, the goodness and the evil are brought face to face. Then a clash occurs, a battle that is called a temptation if it is severe. We did a lot of programming on this. Just look it up. If it's not severe, though, it's not always doom and gloom. It's not always hard. Not everything about spiritual growth is hard. At times, there's stuff, but it's not always. If it's not severe, though, it happens like the fermentation of wine or beer. Didn't see that coming, did you? If the goodness wins, then the evil and its distortion are moved to the sides as much as dregs settle to the bottom of the bottles. The goodness comes to be like a wine that has become vintage wine after fermentation, or beer that has become clear. Nice rhyme. If the evil wins, though, then the goodness and truth are moved to the sides and become murky and dark, like half-fermented wine or half-fermented beer. We did a whole show called Spiritual Fermentation. Look that up if you want to go way more into the details of how that is actually a representative process of what goes on inside of us. And you might say, why is Swedenborg taking this detour into this? Well, this is in the Bible, too. The comparison with fermentation is based on the fact that in the word, yeast means the falsity that comes from evil, as it does in Hosea 7:4, Luke 12:1, and elsewhere. That process is a picture of getting something to a state where it can be, in moderation, allowing for joy in you. So but the process has to go right or it doesn't work. And so here, as we struggle with everything that's there to identify, look, this is the stuff that really needs to get out of here. This is the stuff that is leading to these conditions in the first place. And the process is to just get that stuff trending outward and downward, one little thing at a time. Anything we can really, and I would say another thing is don't feel this pressure that if there's something you don't really think is bad and you're being told that it's bad, maybe it's not the way you understand it, but also we can't really reject something until we really believe for ourselves that it is against important principles. So that in the other sense, like, oh, I should not like this or whatever, you don't know. I mean, you've got to be able to find a clear, if you want to ask for help with that, knowing, okay, is this, because you get all these sort of gray areas. Like I have a lot of people would talk about religious leaders who told them this thing is bad, but then it's not. There's a lot of religious teaching out there that's just not accurate. So you've got to be weighing it in yourself, and the only time it can really get moved is when you find a place where you get to say, what was that phrasing in the beginning that was so great? When you consider that something is in opposition to what is lawful and fair, sincere and decent, good and true, and therefore what is peaceful, happy, and blessed in our lives. When you get there, then it's like, I can take this thing on, and I would end by saying, we do that as a human race too. When some tragedy strikes, it's terrible, but don't we all then focus on it and say, look, this is something that we got to not have, and we take steps to move that outward and downward and create a society in which that's not preying on all of us. We do that in our little minds as well, and be a light of that going out, and that's the news from heaven. Hope you guys enjoyed. I certainly did. Hey, do you want to hang out more? We are going to be doing a conference, an in-person conference coming up next summer. Check it out. It's the offTheLeftEye experience. The link is on the screen there. Sign up. We get to take ideas like this and dive all the way into them. See if we can't really get something that we can use and go out and have become part of our nature. You know, get this stuff written on the mind so that we can go out and live this kind of free, happy, clear life that we're looking at. Thanks so much for hanging out. See you guys soon.